The guns fell silent. In the spring of 1865, a brutal, bloody war that had torn the United States apart was finally over. The nation was in ruins, not just in its cities and farms, but in its very soul. Brother had fought against brother. A way of life built on the backs of enslaved people had been shattered. From the ashes of this conflict rose a profound and daunting question. What comes next? For nearly 4 million newly freed African Americans, the end of the Civil War was not just an end, but a beginning. It was a moment of breathtaking hope, the chance to claim life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The period that followed was called Reconstruction. It would be a time of immense challenge and extraordinary ambition. How do you stitch a fractured country back together? How does a society transform former slaves into full citizens? These were the monumental tasks facing a weary but hopeful nation. It was an attempt to define the meaning of freedom in a nation that had practiced slavery for centuries. For a moment, it felt like a second American Revolution, but that vision was not shared by everyone. The hope of a new dawn would soon collide with the powerful, lingering shadows of the past. To build this new America, Congress began to lay a legal foundation for freedom. They knew proclamations and battlefield victories were not enough. The first monumental step was the 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865. It declared that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. In 1868, Congress passed the 14th Amendment. It established a national definition of citizenship, granting it to all born or naturalized here. It also promised equal protection of the laws, a cornerstone for future civil rights struggles. But Southern states answered with black codes meant to recreate racial hierarchy. The final pillar was the 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870. It stated that the right to vote could not be denied on account of race. Black men across the nation were enfranchised and began to participate in governance. They were elected to local and national office, a profound change in American politics. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are often called the Reconstruction Amendments. They were tools meant to protect the vulnerable and make the war's promise real. For a brief shining moment it seemed as if the law itself could heal the nation's deepest wounds, but the struggle to make that promise real would be contested at every turn. With federal laws and troops present, African Americans seized new opportunities. They founded schools, churches, and built communities. Children flocked to learn. Adults learned to read and write. Churches became centers of education, organizing, and spiritual life. Backed by the 15th Amendment, black men voted in large numbers. They were elected as sheriffs, school board members, and state legislators. More than a dozen black men even served in the United States Congress. Leaders worked to establish public schools and rebuild infrastructure. This progress ignited a furious backlash among many white Southerners. Secret societies, most notoriously the Ku Klux Klan, used terror to suppress rights. They terrorized communities, burned schools and churches, and assaulted leaders. Arson and intimidation were tools to undo Reconstruction's gains. At the same time, state governments passed black codes and legal measures to block rights. Literacy tests, poll taxes, and complicated requirements were imposed to prevent African Americans from voting. Segregation became law in many places. Freedoms were being systematically extinguished. The fleeting dawn of freedom was being pushed back by violence and legal oppression. By the mid-1870s, the nation's will to continue Reconstruction was fading. The North had grown weary. Economic crises shifted focus away from civil rights. A severe depression in 1873 redirected attention toward recovery. Westward expansion and booming industry pulled focus from Southern enforcement. The disputed election of 1876 hinged on contested Southern electoral votes. Leaders struck a behind-the-scenes deal, the Compromise of 1877. In exchange for the presidency, Hayes agreed to withdraw the last federal troops from the South. Those troops had been the last line of defense for black voters. Their removal signaled the end of enforced protection of constitutional rights. Redeemer governments moved quickly to dismantle progress. Black citizens were stripped of the right to vote, their political voice silenced for decades. Jim Crow was locked into place, segregation became law, sharecropping and tenant farming trapped families in cycles of debt and poverty. Debt became a form of economic bondage. The promise of Reconstruction was broken. Its end cast a long, dark shadow across American life. As the dream of Reconstruction faded, another revolution gathered force: industrialization. A nation once defined by farms became a nation of factories and cities. Railroads stitched the continent together, carrying raw materials east. The telegraph, then the telephone, compressed time and space for business and news. The Bessemer process produced cheap, strong steel, the skeleton of bridges and skyscrapers. Oil gushed in Pennsylvania, fueling lamps and lubricating machines. Inventors like Thomas Edison harnessed electricity and gave the world the light bulb. The demand for labor pulled millions toward booming urban centers. Millions of immigrants from southern and eastern Europe poured into New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh, and beyond. They crowded into vibrant neighborhoods, bringing languages, foods, and traditions. These neighborhoods forever changed the face of the American city. Life in these cities was a mix of marvel and misery. For the millions who powered this new economy, the reality was often grim. They worked 10 or 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for meager wages. Machines were dangerous, factories poorly ventilated and dimly lit. No workers' compensation or unemployment insurance meant an injury could ruin a family. Industrial growth created wealth on a previously unimaginable scale. Andrew Carnegie in steel, John D. Rockefeller in oil, J.P. Morgan in finance, celebrated as captains of industry, or condemned as robber barons who exploited workers. Their wealth often bought political influence and fed corruption. Many workers lived in overcrowded, unsanitary tenements. Children as young as 8 were sent into factories. Their health and education were sacrificed to survive. In response, workers organized, forming unions and demanding fair wages and shorter hours. They fought for an 8-hour day and safer workplaces. Strikes like the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 and Homestead in 1892 often turned violent. Employers hired private security and sometimes called in troops to break strikes. The gap between wealth and poverty became a defining feature of the Gilded Age. The era glittered on the surface but was corrupt and unequal underneath. Industrialization made America a global powerhouse by 1900, but it also produced unrest that seeded the Progressive Era reforms. Reconstruction failed to secure full rights. Industrial triumphs created new inequalities. As the nation entered a new century, it grappled with how to live up to its ideals.